Now, last week, the aircraft manufacturer Boeing apologized for two deadly crashes involving its 737 MAX model. This week, a group of Indonesians whose relatives were killed in the first crash are going to be suing Boeing for compensation. An Ethiopian Airlines 737 MAX 8 crashed shortly after takeoff on March the 10th, killing all 157 people on board. The same Boeing model was involved in a Lion Air plane crash in Indonesia in October that killed 189 people. Well, to give us a sense of what these developments mean for the plane maker, I'm now joined by aviation expert from Fraymedia, Desmond Latham. Des, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
So lots been happening with this story ever since the crash. Speculation as to what happened. Was it pilot error? Was it the manufacturer that might be to blame? We're now starting to get a sense of which way this story is going to go, with this Indonesian family saying that they're suing the airplane manufacturer.
Well, I mean, the big story is the FAA has also said it won't certify Boeing MAX 8s. At the moment, it's waiting for the software fix to be certified and then the process begin. We thought by the end of April this would be secured and out of the way, and then the full report would follow, in about a year. What has happened since then is it's not just the litigation that Boeing is facing, but now there's a lot of to and fro around the causes. We know pretty much what caused these crashes. It's the full report comes out in about 8 to 12 months, but we know it's the sensors, the angle of attack sensors. There are two sensors on the nose of the Boeing. They are called redundant. In other words, if one fails, the other one works. What happened in both instances, we are told reliably, is that the right sensor failed by 60%. It was incorrectly reading the angle of attack is how the wind moves over the nose. So it was sensing that the nose was higher than it actually was. When Boeing rebuilt this 737, which is a 1969 aircraft really, that's just been refurbished, they put really two large engines on it, and it pushed the weight backwards. So in takeoff, it's susceptible to flipping backwards. So what they did is introduced MCAS, which is Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, MCAS, which pulled the nose down. It's an automated system, but the problem is they didn't tell the pilots that they'd included this automation, which is when you're flying an airplane and you convert it onto an airplane, which I've done, you are taken through the processes, you trained, you do a few hours, you ticked off. But in this case, they were given an iPad, told it's very similar to the 737 before, and they weren't told about the software.
So the pilots were thinking that they were flying a 1969-like 737.
Correct. I mean, all the run-up, to give you an idea, the run-up to starting the plane is exactly the same as 1969. It involves a 6-phase process, which is very simple. Switch this on, switch that off, switch it on, start engine, switch everything back on again, including the air pressurized system, and then go through the processes. But of course, it's called a glass panel aircraft. It's computerized. So there are many other things that were computerized, not just the same airframe. It's very different. However, in the minds of the pilots, they're flying a plane that they can switch all the automation off, and they are actually flying.
All right, let's talk about that automation, because Ethiopian Air last week said that our pilots followed the guidelines that were set by Boeing. What did they mean?
Well, I mean, Boeing has a process. Every single operator that produces an airplane, there's a big manual of what happens at each phase. If you have a fire in flight, or if you lose a door or something, you go through a precise list, and you train on it in simulators constantly. So that when it happens, it's almost by rote. People just, the pilots start doing it, and the first officer reads off the list. So what happened is that they switched off the automation, and one of them switched back on again.
So
we're told, but this is not. It's not been finalized.
But
so the initial report.
Once they had a problem with the plane, they started saying, "Okay, what do we do? This is what we do. We switch off the automation."
Yes, and there's been some stories told about how they went to the manual. You have to go to the manual. You have to open up a big thick manual, go to page X that says plane is not functioning in the following. You go through there's a long list of things you have to do. They switched off the automation. It switched back on again.
Automatically.
Yes. Now there's a to and fro. Boeing said that the pilots themselves switched it back on. So now already there's finger pointing going on between the pilots or the Ethiopian Airlines and Malaysian, or Lion Air rather, and Boeing as a company. Because Boeing faces $50 to $60 billion loss here if there's some significant problem with the MAX 8. So you can see that the growing sounds are this is not going to end well. But the big thing that's happened is I heard yesterday people sitting on board a Southwest Airlines flight in America hauled out their little card, the emergency card, and they saw Boeing 8. It was actually the 737-800. The passengers wanted to get off the plane.
Wow, wow.
So you can see how even amongst the average, they call PAX, passenger, there's awareness now that this model is problematic. So Boeing has a big problem.
So how do we read into Boeing doing fixes and apologizing for the crashes? You know, some might say that this is a tacit kind of admission of guilt.
Well, it's a duopoly in the airline industry. We used to have a few. McDonnell Douglas, for example, was a producer of airplanes and is no longer in this commercial airspace. They do other things, but not in this commercial airline space. So it's a duopoly in the world. It's Airbus and Boeing. And what has happened in Boeing's case is that they've been allowed to do a lot of their own testing, with the FAA moving away. And the Trump-caused shutdown in government had an implication here, because after October last year, Boeing went to the FAA and said, we have a few fix ideas for this. We don't know if it's a problem, but we think we can fix, in the meantime, deal with the software. But because of the government outage for 4 weeks, the FAA could not function. And so this fix was pushed back. And they are now saying publicly that that government shutdown had an implication on the FAA's fix as well.
All right, so we've talked about the implications financial that are hitting Boeing already. So all these planes are not flying, and what's the story in terms of orders? Have people pulled back?
Yes. Malaysian Airlines has pulled back. Our own country, Comair, ordered 2. And they're both on the ground, and they were going to order more. And I think there's been a freeze on that. We've already had reports that airlines who were going to buy Boeing are moving to Airbus already. We were told that American Airlines yesterday informed their investors that they're not going to fly any of the MAXs, even if they're fixed for the rest of this year. So they've taken them off schedule, and that was 20. And so there's a significant knock-on effect here. There are 355 odd of these planes sitting on the ground. They're brand new aeroplanes. China has 100 by itself.
Wow.
And so it's significant. There are 3,000 planned to be distributed and sold. It was the way in which Boeing was going to really succeed again in the airline industry, and now it's shot itself in the foot to some extent, if I may say that. Dennis Muhlenberg's comments were apologizing in the midst of an investigation confused things. So you're right, there are some significant legal problems with it.
All right, so we've chatted offline, and I'm interested perhaps if you could just share with us that the Washington Post had been following this story and picking up some chatter about pilots.
And Wall Street Journal as well. That's been quite interesting, because both of those American publications, and there's a sense here that some nationalism will come into play, and it comes to the journalism. You know, they wouldn't want to write about one of the oldest companies in the world. It's 100 years old, Boeing, and it's the most significant airline company in the world. I mean, a producing company. And there was a feeling that there would not be critical stories, but I'm afraid to say Wall Street Journal is dug there, because of course it's investors' money linked to that. So it's a very conservative paper, very supportive of Republicans, for example. However, at the same time, it's unearthed a lot of really interesting facts about this. The one thing we did talk about, which I have to mention quickly, is that the Lion Air, the flight path that we have and the flight path of ET302 are exactly the same.
Right.
They show up the same trajectory. They show there was an issue, and now we're looking at the sensor. You can see here, as I said, a reasonable person as a pilot, I would not want to fly in that aeroplane. No, and I fly lots of planes. I would definitely not want to fly in that plane. And that's just a dispassionate comment.
All right, so it seems that technology is a good thing, but it must give you the ability to grab the plane fully, completely, and just fly it the old-fashioned way in the end.
But Peter, this is the big thing. Is that people talk about taking the pilot out of... Pilots get drunk, pilots have problems, they have psychological problems, they want to crash planes and so on. Let's make it the machine to do it. But this is an example of where the machine has to be taken out of the equation at some point. You've got to switch everything off, because you know the plane is flying properly. Something has gone wrong, switch all the automation off, take the robot out of the seat, put the person back, because they lateral think. We know that AI can't lateral think. It works on specific algorithms. So this is a big moment, isn't it?
Des, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thanks so much indeed for coming through, and we hope to chat to you again, because I know this story is going to continue to unfold. Thanks so much indeed.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, so quick break, and then after that we'll have the world of sport.